Welcome, everybody. And I want to say a very special welcome directly to you, the listener, joining us right now.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here.
Whether you're, prepping for a big meeting, catching up on your commute, or just bringing your insanely curious mind to the table, we are thrilled to have you.
Absolutely.
Today, we are unpacking a topic that is, it's as timely as it is fascinating. I'm going to announce today's exact subject right off the bat. We are talking about the Nepal election results and what it means for tourism in Nepal.
It is such a massive, massive shift.
Right. Now, before you start frantically checking your news feeds to see if you missed a massive global headline, let me explain exactly what we are looking at today.
Yeah, give them the context.
The source material we have spread out on the table in front of us comes from a highly anticipated advance copy of an article written by David Ways.
And for those who might not know, David Ways is a very renowned Nepal guidebook author.
Exactly. And you might be wondering, well, why are we working off an advance copy? Well, the official rubber-stamped election results are not entirely out just yet.
Right, it's still processing.
As it stands right now, it could take several more days for the Electoral Commission to finalize the counts and officially declare a majority win.
But the math is already painting a very, very obvious picture.
It really is. The numbers rolling in from the districts are showing an undeniable historic landslide victory for the Rastriya Swatantra Party.
Often referred to as just the RSP.
Right, the RSP, and its incredibly dynamic leader, Balen Shah, who is widely known simply as Balen.
It is a fascinating moment in time to be looking at this data. What's so interesting here is that we are essentially getting a sneak peek into the immediate future of a major global travel destination.
Before the ink on the official ballots is even completely dry?
Exactly. The mathematics, as you mentioned, are practically screaming the result. We are looking at a situation where the RSP is not just edging ahead by a few thousand votes, they are sweeping the board across the entire nation.
Yeah.
And David Ways, being as intimately connected to the pulse of the country as he is, has put together this incredible synthesis of what this specific electoral outcome means for the travel industry.
Right. And I want to be incredibly clear right up front about our approach today. We could have held off on this episode until the official announcement was made, but we wanted to get this crucial information to you immediately.
Because it impacts so much.
It does. However, I need to state this very clearly. We are not a political podcast, and we are completely impartial when it comes to politics. We talk about travel here.
That is an essential distinction to make.
We ensure, we are not taking sides. We aren't endorsing any political viewpoints, parties, or candidates. Our goal today is merely reporting the facts and the analysis as they are laid out in our source material by David Ways.
Yeah, we're looking at the political landscape strictly through the lens of how it impacts a visitor, a trekker, or really any observer of global travel trends.
Exactly.
The political machinations themselves are only relevant to us insofar as they shape the physical and bureaucratic environment that travelers will step into.
Because if we connect this to the bigger picture, the stability or the instability of a government,
it directly dictates everything: the safety, the infrastructure, the visa processes, and the overall experience of anyone visiting that country.
Okay, so let's unpack this mission for today. Since the winner is practically known, mathematically speaking, our goal is to look at the 5-year roadmap for tourism in Nepal, with a 30-something-year-old prime minister at the helm.
Just think about that for a second.
I know, it's wild. A 30-something prime minister taking the reins of a country so deeply entrenched in its historical and sometimes completely antiquated ways of operating.
It is a massive generational shift. The old guard is out, the new guard is in, and they have this incredibly ambitious agenda.
So what does this all mean for you, the traveler? That is what we are going to explore.
The contrast really is staggering.
Yeah.
You have a country known globally for its ancient heritage, its timeless Himalayan mountains, and historically a very traditional older political class.
Right.
Now, you inject a youthful, modernizing, digitally native force into the absolute highest office in the land.
It's a total shock to the system.
It is. The implications for the tourism sector, which is the absolute lifeblood of their international economy, are profound.
Yeah.
We are going to examine how this new leadership plans to completely overhaul the system that every single tourist interacts with.
But to really understand this 5-year roadmap and why these proposed changes are so radical, We have to understand the catalyst for this monumental shift.
Yeah, you don't just wake up one day and vote out an entire political establishment without a massive push.
No, exactly. Our source material details a phenomenon from last September that it calls the Gen Z protests.
Right, the September protests.
And based on what I am reading here, this wasn't just your typical weekend demonstration where people hold signs and then just go home. This was a total systemic rejection of the old ways.
A complete repudiation.
Specifically, the youth were targeting the phenomenon of Nepo babies in power and the long-standing, deeply rooted corruption.
Yes, and to provide some context on what that means in this specific political landscape, the frustration had been building up for decades.
Right.
When the source talks about Nepo babies, it's referring to a system where political power, lucrative government contracts, and economic opportunities, especially within the massive tourism and transportation sectors, were seemingly passed down through family lines.
Or just tight-knit political circles.
Exactly, rather than being earned through merit.
Mm-hmm.
The younger generation, who are highly educated and globally connected via the internet, looked at this nepotism and the corruption that naturally follows it, and they simply had enough.
And what actually triggered this massive uprising is almost poetic in a dark way, considering it was driven by Gen Z.
Oh, the social media ban.
Yes. The advance copy notes that the protests were triggered by a tone-deaf social media ban implemented by the government.
Just a terrible idea.
I mean, think about that. If you want to mobilize a generation that lives, breathes, organizes, and socializes entirely on digital platforms, banning their social media is essentially throwing a lit match into a powder keg.
It was an incredible miscalculation by the establishment. If we connect this to the bigger picture of global youth movements, the digital sphere is their town square.
Right, that's where they exist.
By attempting to shut down platforms to quell dissent, the government didn't silence the youth. They effectively forced them out of the digital town square and into the actual physical streets.
Wow.
And what emerged was a leaderless, digital-first movement. This is a crucial point for understanding how the old government collapsed.
Because there's no head of the snake to cut off.
Precisely. There wasn't a single charismatic figurehead or union boss for the government to target, arrest, or negotiate with behind closed doors. It was a decentralized, collective uprising.
Which makes it incredibly difficult for a traditional, slow-moving government to manage or suppress.
Exactly.
But we have to impartially note that this uprising came with a devastating, tragic cost. It wasn't just a peaceful transition of power.
No, it was very severe.
The source details that there was a tragic loss of 77 lives during these protests. 77 people.
It's heartbreaking.
That is a profound tragedy for the nation, and it underscores the absolute severity of the situation on the streets. It was a visceral, physical confrontation that resulted in immense grief.
The gravity of that loss cannot be overstated.
Yeah.
It was a period of intense, painful upheaval. And it was exactly this tragedy, the public outcry over the loss of those 77 lives, that ultimately broke the back of the establishment.
The pressure just became insurmountable.
It did, forcing the resignation of the CPN-UML-led government. And for our listeners who might not be familiar with the acronyms, CPN-UML stands for the Communist Party of Nepal Unified Marxist-Leninists.
They were the dominant force, right?
They were the dominant force in the ruling coalition. When they were forced to step down, it wasn't just a simple change in leadership. It was the total collapse of the establishment as it had operated for years.
So the government completely collapses. You have a massive power vacuum, which is always a terrifying prospect for any country's stability.
Absolutely terrifying.
To prevent total chaos, the country entered what David Weiss outlines as the interim era. Following the resignation, a 6-month interim government was formed, led by Sushila Karki.
Right, she stepped in.
Her role was essentially a cooling-off period. She acted as a neutral bridge to ensure the fundamental machineries of the state kept running, preventing a complete collapse while the country prepared for new elections.
Sushila Karki's tenure was absolutely critical. When a deeply entrenched establishment collapses suddenly, the risk of institutional failure is extraordinarily high.
Yeah, everything could just stop.
Her steady hand was needed to ensure the country didn't spiral out of control. It was a transitional phase. However, it also highlighted just how desperate the public was for a permanent, functional change.
They tolerated the interim government because it was necessary.
But they were hungry for a total reset at the ballot box.
Now, here is where it gets really interesting for the traveler. What was happening to the tourism industry during this 6-month interim era?
You'd think everything would just grind to a halt.
Right. But the advance copy notes that, for the most part, daily tourism was largely left alone. Tourists were still arriving. The mountains were still there, and the guest houses in Kathmandu were still operating.
Business as usual on the surface.
But under the surface, something significant was happening with law enforcement. Without the constant interference of political bosses, the police actively reinvigorated their investigation into trekker rescue scams.
This is huge.
And they actually arrested many high-profile players in the industry.
This is a massive point for anyone who has ever researched trekking in the Himalayas. For years, there have been deep-seated systemic issues regarding fake helicopter rescue scams.
Can you explain how those work for someone who hasn't heard of it?
The mechanics of this scam are deeply concerning. Unscrupulous operators would essentially collude to order unnecessary helicopter rescues for trekkers who might just have a mild stomach bug or a slight headache.
Sometimes they even deliberately make them sick, right? Like putting garlic in the soup or something.
There have certainly been reports of that kind of extreme manipulation, but basically it's all done to claim exorbitant insurance payouts from international travel insurers.
Wow.
It was a blight on the industry's reputation, driving up insurance premiums for everyone and putting a cloud of suspicion over genuine rescue operators.
So during this interim period,
While the political class was sidelined and unable to protect their cronies, the police seemingly took the opportunity to crack down hard.
and the fact that they arrested high-profile players indicates that this wasn't just a surface-level sweep of low-level guides. They were going after the architects of the corruption.
Exactly.
Which brings us to a critical question, one that David Ways poses in his analysis for you to ponder. Will the new government, this incoming RSP majority, continue this vital crackdown on the trekker rescue scams?
Right. Or will the pressure ease off once the new political players settle into their offices and start receiving pressure from wealthy industry lobbyists?
That is perhaps one of the most vital questions for the immediate future of the trekking industry there.
A new government means new priorities. Will Balen Shah and the RSP view this police action as a necessary cleansing of a vital industry and give the police the resources to continue?
Or will the momentum naturally fade as they focus on their massive digital overhaul plans?
The safety and trust of the international trekking community hinge heavily on whether this reinvigorated policing continues unabated.
Okay, let's pivot from the interim period and jump directly into the actual election results.
Let's do it.
The source material argues very strongly that a landslide victory is actually a fantastic thing for travelers. The author states that a close election would have been an absolute nightmare.
It really would have been.
And I want to pause here because normally we think of close competitive elections as a sign of a healthy democracy. Why would a close election be a nightmare for a tourist?
It comes down to the historical context of how political disputes are settled in this specific region. In systems that are highly polarized, narrow electoral margins are incredibly dangerous.
Because neither side accepts it.
Exactly. If the election had been close, say, a 51 to 49% split, it would have inevitably led to immediate cries of fraud from the losing old guard.
You would have seen accusations of outside interference, endless ballot recounts, and massive political grandstanding.
But more importantly for the traveler, a contested election paralyzes the physical infrastructure of the country.
Right. And David Ways mentions exactly how that paralysis manifests on the streets. It manifests through countrywide strikes. And let me make sure I'm pronouncing this exactly as required for our discussion today. These strikes are referred to as bandas.
Bandas, yes.
If the election was close, the fear was that the losing side would trigger endless bandas. For a tourist, a banda means absolute gridlock. All public transportation stops. Taxis don't run.
Shops literally pull down their metal shutters.
If you have a flight to catch or a bus out of Kathmandu, you are completely stranded. But because this election is an undeniable landslide, the mandate is too loud to ignore.
There's no room for argument.
The old guard cannot credibly complain about fraud when they are beaten by such a massive margin.
Precisely. The sheer mathematics of the RSP's lead silences the usual tactics of disruption. There is no appetite for a banda when the public has spoken so overwhelmingly.
This is a historic mandate.
It is. The source details that the RSP is on track to hit the 138-seat majority in the parliament. To put that into perspective, this is the first time a single party has achieved an outright majority in 27 years.
Wow.
Not since the 1999 elections has one party held such a decisive, commanding position.
That statistic just stops you in your tracks. 27 years without a single party majority. David Ways states that this effectively ends the era of revolving door coalitions.
It was a constant revolving door.
And get this number. There were 14 governments in the last 18 years. 14.
It's practically a new government every year.
As someone who looks at infrastructure and development, how can you possibly build long-term tourism projects or implement consistent regulations when the Minister of Tourism changes every 15 months?
You can't. It creates an environment of total administrative stagnation. When governments are constantly forming, collapsing, and reforming in fragile coalitions, politicians are focused entirely on political survival.
Rather than governance and policy implementation.
Exactly. The civil service and the bureaucracy become paralyzed. They know that the minister giving them orders today to build a new trail network might be ousted in a vote of no confidence next month.
So they just do nothing.
They do nothing. A 138-seat majority changes that dynamic entirely. It provides a massive, stable runway for actual long-term planning. It replaces survival politics with the potential for policy-driven governance.
So who is the man stepping onto this massive, stable runway? Let's look at the profile of the next prime minister, Balen Shah.
This is where the story gets really fascinating.
He is 35 years old. He is a former rapper, which gave him an incredible cool factor and an immediate, authentic connection with the youth who were organizing those digital-first protests.
But he isn't just a pop culture figure who rode a wave of popularity.
Right. He is also a highly educated structural engineer.
It is an incredibly unique combination of skill sets to bring to the office of Prime Minister.
To say the least.
The rapper background gave him the communication skills, the charisma, and the ability to tap into the cultural zeitgeist of the younger generation. He inherently understands their digital town square.
But the structural engineer background gives him an analytical, systems-based, problem-solving mindset.
Exactly. And he didn't just appear out of nowhere on the national stage. He proved his doer reputation during his time as the mayor of Kathmandu.
Yes, his mayoral track record is heavily highlighted in the source. He didn't just sit behind a desk in a suit. He was out there actively managing waste, physically clearing illegally built structures blocking the streets, and visibly standing up to the federal government when they tried to interfere with city management.
And when you are the mayor of Kathmandu, you are managing the most chaotic, complex, heavily populated, and economically vital urban center in the country.
It's a grueling job.
It was the perfect proving ground to show the electorate that he could actually execute on his promises.
However, the author is careful to impartially discuss the risks ahead. It is not all just unbridled optimism. This is a massive, unprecedented transition of power, and it comes with significant vulnerabilities.
It definitely does.
The first major concern raised in the source is that Balen's national campaign was built heavily on his personal charisma and high-level contracts with the voters, broad promises to fix the system, rather than a deeply granular, extensively detailed policy manifesto.
I have to say, I can see why that's a red flag. It feels incredibly fresh and exciting right now. But a government led by a charismatic personality might lack the deep structural policy framework needed to govern a complex nation over a grueling 5-year term.
It is one thing to have a high-level contract saying we will digitize tourism. It is an entirely different beast to have the 500-page white paper detailing exactly how the back-end servers will be funded, built, and maintained across remote mountain regions.
Furthermore, the source points out past controversies during his time as mayor of Kathmandu that could hint at future friction. There are noted instances of heavy-handedness, particularly concerning the clearing of street vendors and the removal of informal housing.
Oh, right.
Street vendors have long been a vibrant, characteristic trait of the urban landscape there, providing affordable goods to locals and an authentic experience for tourists. Moving them or removing them entirely in the name of modernization requires a delicate balance between order and the livelihoods of very vulnerable populations.
A heavy-handed approach on a national scale could quickly erode the massive populist support he currently enjoys.
Exactly.
And then there is the internal threat, which might be the most dangerous. The advance copy states that it isn't just Balen and the RSP. The party is full of other ambitious, high-stakes players with their own egos.
That's always the catch.
Historically, Nepali political parties have a terrible, predictable habit of collapsing from within due to internal power struggles and factionalism. The biggest challenge for Balen might not be the defeated opposition parties.
It might be his own party.
Right. Keeping the RSP unified and focused for the full 5-year term without fracturing over cabinet positions or policy disagreements.
That is the quintessential danger of a newly formed, rapidly expanding political party. They are incredibly united when they have a common enemy, the old guard.
But once they are actually in power and have to make difficult, unpopular decisions regarding resource allocation, the differing ideologies and personal ambitions within the party can tear it apart.
Managing those internal egos will require immense political dexterity from a 35-year-old prime minister who has never managed a national coalition before.
Okay, let's pivot from the political mechanics to what this all actually means for the physical experience of traveling to the country.
Let's get into the tourism revolution.
Our source material covers exactly that, the tourism revolution, specifically looking at the RSP's Bacha Patra, which translates to their pledge document. The grand goal outlined in this document is wildly ambitious. They aim to double tourist arrivals and spending within 5 years.
It's a massive goal.
Now, I have to push back a little here. Double the arrivals in 5 years. Given the current state of their infrastructure, isn't that mathematically nearly impossible without completely overwhelming places like Kathmandu and the major trekking routes?
That is the exact friction point the author highlights. Doubling arrivals and spending in 5 years is an astronomical target. It requires not just a slick marketing campaign, but a fundamental, from-the-ground-up overhaul of the entire tourism infrastructure.
You need double the hotel capacity.
Double the aviation bandwidth, double the sanitation facilities on the trails. The source breaks down this Bacha Patra into 3 main pillars designed to achieve this, and it is fascinating to analyze the pros, the cons, and the harsh realities of implementing each one.
Let's start by looking at Pillar 1, the one-door digital portal. The plan is to completely digitize trekking and heritage site fees nationwide.
The pros are obvious to anyone who has ever traveled there.
David Ways describes the absolute pain of wasting an entire Tuesday afternoon chasing various paper permits through dusty, disorganized government offices in Kathmandu.
Oh, it's notorious.
You need one piece of paper from this office, another stamp from a building across town, and it eats up valuable vacation time. A one-stop digital portal where you just pay on your phone and get a QR code sounds like an absolute dream for efficiency.
It does sound ideal on paper, and it aligns perfectly with the RSP's digitally native brand. But the source is very quick to point out the severe cons and the harsh realities of implementation.
Digital implementation in Nepal is notoriously difficult.
Very difficult. The author mentions a great practical example, the frequent failure of passport scanners at the international entry points. You have tech that promises efficiency, but it constantly delivers frustration due to a lack of maintenance, software updates, or basic IT support.
So what happens when you take that tech to the mountains?
Exactly. The critical question here is infrastructure. Will remote checkpoints in places like Narfu actually have the reliable 247 internet connectivity required to verify these shiny new digital permits?
Probably not.
You risk creating a system that works perfectly when you are sitting in a cafe with high-speed Wi-Fi in Kathmandu, but completely fails when you are a week deep into the mountains and the local guard can't load the verification server.
And David Ways goes even deeper into the current systemic failures that need addressing before any new tech is rolled out. He points out the absolute failure of the current TIMS cards.
The TIMS card, yeah.
For our listeners, TIMS stands for the Trekkers Information Management Systems. In theory, it is supposed to be a database that tracks your safety on the trail, but the author calls the current iteration an insulting slap in the face to trekkers.
It really is.
There are no checkpoints actively scanning them, and there is no active safety tracking. If a trekker goes missing in a snowstorm, the TIMS card system is essentially useless for locating them.
It has become a laughingstock. Just another fee to pay with no tangible benefit.
The author's argument is clear. Before you build a shiny new digital system, shouldn't you prove you can make the current basic safety systems function properly?
Exactly. It is fundamentally a crisis of trust. And this concern extends deeply into how the national park permits are managed.
How so?
Currently, the national park permits generally work at the local level. But the fear raised in the advance copy is regarding centralization. If you centralize all these funds into a single digital portal managed in Kathmandu, will the money ever actually reach the specific remote parks that desperately need it for conservation and trail maintenance?
That's a great point.
Places like Upper Mustang or the Solukhumbu region have complained for decades about funds being siphoned off in the capital and not returning to the local regions. Centralization through a digital portal often breeds further disenfranchisement of rural areas, if not managed with absolute transparency.
The author also throws a massive pointed critique at the NTB, the Nepal Tourism Board. The source states that the NTB desperately needs restructuring from the ground up because it currently acts more like a bloated marketing firm than a functional regulator of the industry.
It's a huge problem.
They spend massive amounts of their budget on expensive overseas promotion trips, sending delegates to trade shows in Europe and America, which arguably does very little to improve the actual physical product of tourism on the ground.
The structural issue there is profound, and it's a common trap for developing tourism economies. A tourism board should be heavily focused on facilitating infrastructure, enforcing safety standards, managing waste on the trails, and ensuring local communities benefit.
Not just marketing.
If the NTB is entirely focused on high-end marketing campaigns while the basic permit systems are failing and trail safety is compromised, their priorities are completely inverted. The RSP's digital revolution will simply fail if the institutions tasked with managing it, like the NTB, are not fundamentally reformed and refocused first.
Moving on to Pillar 2 of the Bacha Patra, the digital nomad visa. This is based on a 2025 proposal where the party wants to adopt what they call the Bali model.
The famous Bali model.
They want to create a 5-year multiple entry visa specifically for remote workers who can prove they earn at least $1,500 a month. Now, on the surface, this sounds kind of cool.
It sounds modern.
Right. Bringing in hiring individuals who will stay longer, work from a laptop with a view of the Himalayas, and inject foreign cash directly into the local economy.
It is a concept that was incredibly popular, maybe even revolutionary, a few years ago during the peak of the remote work boom. But the author's critique here is incredibly sharp.
He argues that the ship has sailed on this 2010s era idea.
While it sounds like a guaranteed cash cow for the government, the harsh economic reality observed in places that actually implemented this, like Bali or parts of Portugal and Spain, is that it drives up local costs exponentially.
The cost of basic food, daily transportation, and crucially, local housing and accommodation skyrockets.
Landlords realize they can charge a foreign tech worker triple what a local family can pay, effectively pricing local residents out of their own historic neighborhoods.
And that leads directly to building deep resentment among the locals toward foreigners. You essentially create a two-tiered society where foreign remote workers are living luxuriously in cafes, while locals struggle with massive inflation caused directly by this influx of unregulated foreign capital.
It causes huge friction.
And honestly, David Weiss points out that it is a bit of a joke for the government to prioritize a flashy, buzzword-heavy nomad visa when simply improving standard basic business visas or extending long-term tourist visas without so much red tape would likely be far more effective and significantly less disruptive to the local economy.
It really feels like a policy designed to generate a positive headline in international tech blogs, rather than a policy born from a nuanced understanding of local economic impact.
Totally.
Furthermore, that specific $1,500 a month requirement ensures you are bringing in a demographic that will naturally demand higher-end infrastructure, reliable, high-speed internet, air conditioning, Western-style cafes.
Which forces the local government and private sector to lean heavily into catering to them.
Right, further commercializing areas that perhaps shouldn't be so heavily developed, shifting the cultural fabric of the neighborhoods.
Now, Pillar 3 is massive and arguably the most important for that goal of doubling arrivals. The plan is to remove the EU air safety ban.
This is critical.
The RSP has pledged to get Nepal off the European Union's aviation blacklist. If you aren't familiar with this currently, airlines from Nepal are banned from flying into EU airspace due to safety concerns.
And EU airlines won't fly there.
Right. If they achieve this, it allows for direct, high-spending European flights to arrive straight into the country, entirely bypassing the exhausting, time-consuming Middle East hubs like Doha or Dubai. The economic impact of direct European flights would be astronomical.
It would absolutely be a game changer for their numbers. But the reality check provided by the source material is severe. To get off that EU blacklist requires deep, complex, technical reform of CAN.
The Civil Aviation Authority of Nepal.
Exactly. Specifically, the EU has demanded for years that CAN must be split into two distinct, separate entities, a safety regulator and a service provider.
Right, because currently CAN does both, which is a massive conflict of interest.
A huge conflict.
When a single agency is responsible for regulating aviation safety standards, and at the same time profits from running the airport services and collecting landing fees, there is an inherent incentive to ignore safety violations to keep the money flowing.
Exactly. Splitting them means someone loses a lot of power and access to funds.
Which is exactly why the deeply entrenched bureaucracy has fought this reform tooth and nail for years.
And we simply cannot ignore the stark reality of the safety record itself. The source bluntly states that aviation safety is still a massive life-or-death issue in the country, with frequent tragic plane and helicopter crashes, particularly in the challenging mountain terrain.
You cannot simply market or negotiate your way off a strict European safety blacklist.
No, you have to fundamentally, culturally change the safety protocols, the pilot training, and the maintenance infrastructure.
And David Weiss notes a very specific, practical hesitation regarding their recent aviation projects. He mentions that he wouldn't want to fly into the shiny, newly built Gautam Buddha International Airport down in Pirahawa if his actual final destination is Kathmandu.
Why is that?
Because while the airport is new, the logistics of getting from there to the capital are a nightmare.
That example perfectly illustrates the problem with prioritizing flashover function. The country has invested huge amounts of borrowed money and national pride into building shiny new international airports across the country, largely to show the world they are modernizing and to push for lifting this EU ban.
But if the fundamental safety protocols are still flawed, and if the connecting infrastructure, like the fast-track highways that are supposed to connect these new airports to major hubs like Kathmandu, are missing, constantly delayed, or inadequate, the new airports are essentially useless monuments.
You land in Pirahawa, and then what? You face a grueling, potentially dangerous 10-hour bus ride on crumbling mountain roads to get to where you actually want to go.
The author's point is painfully clear. Improve the safety and efficiency of what is already there before building shiny new things. Safety and practical logistics must precede expansion.
This brings us to a fascinating part of our analysis: the current season and the Black Swan event.
Yes, what is happening right now?
Despite all this massive political shifting, the fall of governments, and these grand long-term plans for digital visas and new airports, what is happening on the ground today? The advanced copy notes that we are currently in the thick of the spring peak season.
And guess what? Budget travelers and backpackers are currently flocking to the mountains in huge numbers.
Because the mountains don't care about politics.
It is a beautiful constant in the unpredictable world of global travel. Governments may rise and fall, prime ministers may resign, but the Himalayas remain exactly where they are.
The budget and backpacker demographic is incredibly resilient. They aren't deterred by the collapse of a political establishment in the capital because their primary interaction is with the physical landscape and the remote local communities, not the federal bureaucracy.
However, even the most resilient, go-with-the-flow travelers are currently facing a massive external disruption that no one could have predicted.
Yes, the Black Swan shock. The source details a massive, unforeseen global geopolitical event that is severely impacting travel logistics to the region right now.
On February 28th, the U.S. and Israel launched a war on Iran.
This sudden conflict has sent global aviation routing into an absolute tailspin. The airspaces in Qatar, the UAE, and Kuwait have seen partial or total closures due to the military activity and safety concerns.
The logistical nightmare this creates for a country entirely reliant on air travel is staggering. Major global aviation hubs like Dubai and Doha, which are the primary transit points for Europeans and Americans flying into South Asia, are effectively bottlenecked.
The source notes an incredible statistic. There were over 75 canceled flights into Kathmandu via these Middle Eastern hubs in just one single week.
Travelers are finding themselves stranded in transit lounges, or they're being forced to scramble for incredibly expensive, complex reroutes through places like Singapore or India just to finally reach their destination.
And this massive external shock perfectly illustrates the value of adaptability, and it proves exactly why having a stable majority government at home is so crucial.
Because when a massive global crisis hits one that is entirely out of the country's control, you need a national leadership that can handle the fallout.
You need a government that can swiftly negotiate with international carriers, manage the visa extensions for stranded tourists, and organize logistics without falling into petty, internal political bickering over who gets the blame.
Precisely. If this exact airspace crisis had happened during one of those fragile 14 governments in 18 years coalition periods, the administrative response would likely have been completely paralyzed by infighting.
A stable 138-seat majority can act decisively. Furthermore, the source makes a brilliant counterintuitive point about the resilience of the travelers themselves during this crisis.
The high-end luxury tourists cancel their trips when things get complicated.
But the backpackers, they are adaptable. They figure out the crazy reroutes. They endure the 12-hour layovers in India.
This leads to a profound critique of the NTB's current obsession with exclusively attracting high-end luxury tourists. I found this part of the analysis so compelling.
Me too.
David Way suggests that the Nepal Tourism Board needs to completely abandon this narrow obsession with only catering to the ultra-wealthy who stay in five-star resorts and charter private helicopters.
He points out that if the NTB is finally reformed by the RSP, the very first thing they should do is remove anyone from the board who has a vested personal or family interest in making a profit from that specific high-end sector.
It's a massive conflict of interest. Instead, he strongly suggests adopting what he calls the Thailand of the 2000s model. I want to dive into this because it's a brilliant blueprint.
The Thailand of the 2000s model was arguably the most brilliantly effective tourism strategy in modern history. It was based on the concept of egalitarian tourism.
Egalitarian tourism.
Yes. Thailand in that era catered equally and enthusiastically to all three main groups of travelers: the budget backpackers staying in $5 hostels, the mid-range holiday makers staying in comfortable boutique hotels, and the high-end luxury travelers staying in exclusive beach resorts.
It created a robust, highly diversified tourism economy that could survive almost any global shock.
Exactly. Because if you only cater to the high end and a sudden war closes the luxury airline routes or a global recession hits, your entire national industry collapses overnight because billionaires stop traveling.
But if you have a massive, strong base of adaptable budget travelers who will happily take a 3-day, bone-rattling bus ride from India just to get there, your industry survives.
The budget travelers keep the local guest houses, the street food vendors, and the independent guides employed.
The question is, will Balen and the new government listen to this economic logic, or will a few powerful people just continue trying to line their own pockets by pushing exclusive luxury developments?
It is the defining economic question for their next 5 years. Will they build an inclusive economy that benefits the many, or an exclusive one that benefits the few? As we start to wrap up our analysis of this incredible document, we need to look at the bumper year forecast.
The author concludes his piece by looking ahead to the upcoming late September to December season, which is traditionally their most vital window for trekking.
With the internal political risks dropping overnight due to this massive, undeniable landslide victory and a stable majority government finally forming, the projection for this upcoming season is incredibly optimistic.
David Ways predicts a massive bumper year, and it makes total sense. Whenever a strong majority government has been formed in the region, there is an immediate, palpable uptick in tourism investment.
The paralyzing political risk that usually scares off foreign tour operators and large international travel agencies essentially evaporates.
They know they won't have to deal with sudden bandas or collapsing ministries. Assuming world events in the Middle East don't escalate further and global fuel prices remain somewhat stable, all the economic indicators point to a massive influx.
The demand that was pent up during the months of protests and the interim instability is going to flood in.
So the absolute best advice to you, the listener, if you are planning a trip for this fall, book early. Secure your guides and your flights now.
But as we look forward to this modernized, booming, digitally streamlined future, David Ways offers a deeply poignant, almost philosophical reflection on the true cost of this rapid modernization.
This is perhaps the most important takeaway from the entire document for anyone who truly loves travel.
As a country steps boldly into the future with a 35-year-old prime minister pushing for digital portals, new airports, and modern infrastructure, it faces an existential threat to its own unique identity.
The author pleads that the country must not lose what makes it so profoundly special.
He lists these unique, chaotic, beautiful elements so perfectly. The sacred cows just wandering freely on the bustling streets.
The vibrant, loud energy of the street vendors selling spices and textiles.
The incredible, intricate woodwork of the traditional Newari architecture that has stood for centuries.
And out in the mountains, the rough, dusty, foot-trodden trails that generations of trekkers have walked.
If you replace those rough, challenging trails with smooth concrete steps and paved roads to make it easier.
If you tear down the heritage buildings to build generic, glass-paneled high-rises.
And if you light up the ancient mystical squares with bright neon signs instead of warm, subtle lighting, you destroy the very essence of the destination.
You turn a profoundly unique, culturally rich experience into just another generic, easily digestible tourist trap.
The author solemnly notes that this is already happening on some of the famous trekking routes, where new dirt roads are physically paving over the ancient footpaths.
Tourists don't travel halfway across the globe, enduring canceled flights and jet lag to see a generic high-rise or a paved road. They want raw nature, preserved heritage, and the sheer, unfiltered element of roughing it that makes an epic Himalayan trek truly epic.
Preserving the distinct character of places like Tamil, the historic town of Kritipur, the incredible pottery squares of Timi, the spiritual center of Bodhanath, the lakeside beauty of Pokhara, the sweeping sunrise views from Nagarkot, and the ancient charm of Panauti must be the absolute paramount concern for this new government.
Modern infrastructure should be built to power and protect the heritage, not to pave over it.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. The infrastructure must serve the heritage, not the other way around.
And with that comprehensive, exhaustive look at the 5-year roadmap ahead, I am going to formally transition us out of the political aspects of this topic by stating verbatim, as required, that's politics over with. Nepal's good to go with stability.
Indeed it is.
Before we go, I want to enthusiastically recommend the source materials author David Ways and his incredible resources. If you are even slightly considering a trip to see these changes for yourself, you must check out his The Longest Way Home Nepal Travel website and his guidebooks.
We are talking about the most updated guidebooks in the world today. They are 100% independent.
There are no paid placements from fancy hotels. He gives you the exact to-the-penny costs for every meal and bed, and crucially, especially given our conversation about scams today, his books feature the world's only vetted scam-free agency list.
Whether you need the Trekking in Nepal guide for the remote mountains, or the Nepal strategy guide for navigating the hidden streets of Kathmandu or the southern jungles, these are the definitive must-have resources you need in your backpack.
They truly are indispensable for navigating the shifting realities. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey through the data today. We will catch you on the next one.